So this is about the beginnings of the ReWild coaching and the beginnings of what we've been doing about observing, etc. Is all about understanding instincts, our instincts and the horse's instincts, and what purpose they have within the horses and our communication, and particularly connecting. And when we're connecting with natural instincts, it is a way to build our trust and mutual awareness. So this is about understanding why they do what they do and why we react, how we react to what they do, and how we can hopefully try and reframe that to a response as opposed to a reaction. So in this presentation, we're going to be looking at understanding the core idea of connecting with human and horse instincts. And in particular today, focusing on exploring the role of instincts and purpose in building a mutual connection. Because what we want is it to be a balanced connection that has moments of ebb and flow. It's never going to be always 50-50. Sometimes it will be 75-25, sometimes it will be 90-10, sometimes it will be 30-70. What we're looking for is an overall balance of communication, a balance of connection, so that when we become aware, they are able to understand our awareness and understand our responses, because what we want, like I say, is to respond and not react. So this is just a welcome and what I just talked about really, and what we're going to focus on. So moving on. So this is just a quote that I'd like you to keep in mind. That true connection with a horse begins when we learn to listen, not just with our ears, but with our instincts. And there's a big difference between when people say, let's listen to our hearts or listen to our instincts. Although they're parallel, one has much more awareness and thought behind it, and one is more emotional. They're both good, they're both okay. But when we are talking about how having to, wanting to understand, I think we need to come from a place of more factual, more scientific, more actual, and then layer our hearts and our emotions on the top. Because if we don't do that, from my perspective, if we only head from an emotional point of view, sometimes our emotions are not 100% controllable. Yeah, so I think it's important that we afford ourselves the possibility to understand our emotions before we lead with them. Okay. So what are instincts? Instincts are our most primal reactions to the world around us, and they help both horses and humans navigate their environment. And of course, we all know how horses are driven more by instinct, and we see it on the surface more, but we are also driven by those same instincts. It's just the way we manage them are different. Instincts like flight or alertness are essential for survival. So these are their impulses to ensure that they are able to navigate their environment, wild, feral, or domestic. And how they present them depends on the environment that they are given and what sort of energy surrounds them. But as human beings, this is where I think it's really important that we understand that we are mammals and parallel beings, even if we take a slightly different path every now and again, that we are also driven by our instincts. But we do often suppress them. And this is particularly in our lives at the moment, in modern life. I mean, there's so many things going on in the world that we avoid because we cannot face them, because it's too overwhelming. And when we get overwhelmed, that's when the emotions come back in, and that's when we end up being with that feeling of out of control. And as human beings, I would say 99% of us want to have some degree of control. I think these natural responses are something that is really worth looking into. And it's certainly part of particularly this course that you're doing, this path that we're taking now together, that rewilding, that instinctual based, that nature based understanding, because I truly believe if we can understand ourselves better, we will understand our horses better. And if we understand our horses better, they will in turn reciprocate. They will have that mirroring effect when we have those conversations with them. And I think it will end up that our instincts will allow us to engage with them more naturally. So the purpose of instincts and horses, I think, is a really interesting subject, because horses very rarely do something for nothing. There's always a reason behind how they are. Even when they are just relaxing, there is a reason why they're relaxing. They need it. Where quite often when if you take, it's really interesting, the ability to have downtime. A horse knows instinctually when they need to have downtime, and when the domestic environment doesn't allow them that, that's when we get stress, that's when we get tension, that's when we get anxiety and behaviors that go along with that. We as human beings fundamentally know we need downtime, but very rarely afford ourselves that, and we are masters of masking the necessity for that downtime. So for horses, obviously, they are survival animals, they're prey animals, but I don't want to dwell on that for all the reasons like we spoke about before, to shift this paradigm that prey and predator is the only relationship that we can have. What it entails is that the behavior that they show and how they move and how they interact and how they communicate both with their herd and with us as their humans, we need to figure out what is driving that response or reaction. Hopefully it is a response and not a reaction, because one comes out of thought and the other one comes out of usually fear when we're talking about our horses. The majority of the time, horses are going to rely on their instincts to create safety, whether that be physical, mental, or emotional, and whether that be wild, feral, or domestic. They require to feel safe. When we talk about my horse is happy, I'm not entirely sure if happy is a word that you can actually apply scientifically in the economy, because it's usually because they feel safe. They feel safe mentally, they feel safe emotionally, and they feel safe physically. And their needs are being met within the parameters of what we can give them as domestic animals. So that takes me on to us as human beings. So like horses, like I say, we also have automatic reactions. We have fight, we have flight, and we have freeze. But unlike horses, we often suppress these instincts due to the society that we live in, due to the fact that it's often peer pressure, or we don't want to look vulnerable, we don't want to feel vulnerable, we need to hide our emotions. And that is one of the reasons why, going back to what I said at the beginning, we need to come to this from an instinctual point of view rather than an emotional point of view. Because if there is somebody that has suppressed those emotions for a long time, and all of a sudden you say, right now, let's have an emotional conversation, you are going to open floodgates. And I don't think that would be fair to the person or to the horse that they're trying to interact with. But once they understand that their instincts are actually connected to their emotions, and the two can actually go side by side, and actually one can support the other. When we become more involved in our instincts and more aware and in attune to our instincts as a human being, as the mammal that we are, those emotional surges will be felt as something positive as opposed to something negative. We won't feel vulnerable because we understand that emotional surge is needed so that we can understand the purpose of it, and we can then use it to our benefit. So this takes me on to fear, for example. Fear is a huge emotional surge, and quite a lot of people will be fearful of horses. They might love them, they might want to be around them, but underlying that desire, often there is an element of fear, whether it's a physical fear because they're scared that they're going to get hurt, or it's more of a mental fear because they don't know what they think they don't know what they're doing, or it's an emotional fear that they don't want to harm the horse, they want to connect, they want to be loved by their horse. And that surge, that realization and that acceptance of that fear, that vulnerability, is something that once we are able to comprehend it, it's a surge that is something that we can, rather than a tsurami, it is just a gentle ebb and flow, like a beautiful still sea, like the Mediterranean Sea that doesn't get surged very often. So what my aim is with the ReWild coaching program is to help us reclaim the understanding of our instincts so that we can be more attuned, more aligned with the behaviors of our horses. So how do we align our instincts with purpose within what we will be exploring over the next few weeks? So, like I say, if we can tap into our instincts and tap into that understanding, we are going to not only be more aware of how we behave, how we act, our energy, but also that of our horses. And that is the fundamental reason why people find horses as aliens and don't expect an understanding from them or with them, is because they don't believe that our instincts are similar, that we do have similar paths. And this is something that understanding, which I'll get to towards the end, that nature, the nurture aspect of our lives and their lives, and how we have forced each one into a different road, really. It's a different path. So I know I talk about this a lot, and this is where we started last week, but one of the key elements to actually be able to achieve this is observation and awareness. Observation brings on awareness, and that awareness creates more observation. And it's in those moments of observation that will allow you to, or anybody, to have more understanding, even if you don't understand in the moment. But by observing and by absorbing, it gives you that time to digest and reset and understand more why they are reacting or responding like they are, because you're taking in, this is a holistic observation. You're not just standing looking at your horse, as beautiful as they may be. It's holistic. You're thinking about the time of day, the weather, what is it that has just happened, what happened before the thing that happened. That is the key to when I talk about observation. And it doesn't even have to be that physical. The whole point of the emotional, mental, and physical trifactor, that triangle, is that they work together. And it could be that, at one moment the physical is on top of the triangle, and then another moment the triangle shifts, and it is the mental, and it shifts, and it is the emotional. All three are in play all the time. That's really important to understand. They're always in play, but at any one moment, one will take over from the other. And depending on your horse and depending on how, their genetics, how they have been nurtured, it will depend on which of those is the stronger of the three. So understanding, paying attention to their natural behaviors, and again, natural behaviors within a domestic setting is not natural as in the wild setting. And that's a distinction that we need to make. They still have natural reactions and natural instincts, but they are going to be tailored by the environment that we give them. And that's why I think it's really important that we try and give them the most natural environment possible, so that they can rely on some of their instincts that they are burying like we bury ours. So this takes us nicely to ourselves. And I think this is something that we tend to not do, and that is observe ourselves. So what are your automatic reactions when your horse moves towards or away from you? What are your automatic reactions away from your horse and in other circumstances? And how does that change your energy, and how does that shift? You know, this is to get to where we need to be. We need to understand, like I said just earlier, that there is a dynamic, a dual dynamic, whether it's, like I say, it won't be 50-50 all the time, but there's always a dual dynamic within any dialogue that we're having with our horses. So to bridge that gap, which is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to aim to bridge that gap between understanding to get responses and not reactions. And this goes right back to understanding that both humans and horses have instincts, and to understand the two of them will help bridge that gap between the communication gap between us, which is the ideal where we want to be. So obviously more traditional methods which rely on control and dominance is usually coming from a place of lack of understanding, because the more we rely on understanding and awareness, the less need there is for dominance and control, because that is just how horses act between themselves. So if we can focus on the instinctual behaviors and realize that the connection is based on that mutual respect, and when I use that word, it's usually respect from the human to the horse and awareness from the horse to the human, because I do agree with the statement that horses don't understand things like respect as we understand it. So I very rarely use that word, but I think it's important, as if we're going to do this dual dynamic, is to understand we can respect them through awareness, and they can be aware of us, and we will take that as respect. And this is literally where the key to it all is understanding that dual dynamic and understanding that we are not so different. So, to recap, both horses and humans are driven by instinct. There's nothing different between them. It's just that we manage it and approach it differently, and we have different purposes. So horses are constantly seeking safety and connection, so that is their happy place. And humans, to get there, we need to reconnect with our instincts to understand that, because our happy places, unfortunately, are usually modern world driven. A true happy place is exactly what the horses are looking for, and that is safety and connection. And if we can join them in that space, that is where we're going to find an ability to have this dialogue that we need with them, so that they can, because this is not just about sitting around and, you know, sticking your thumb in your belly button. This is about going through this. But you as a human being are absolutely, it's absolutely okay that you have a desire to spend time as a human with your horse, as in riding and doing those things. But it's how you approach that and how you have that dialogue with her and with all the horses that allow you to truly be the horse, a true horse person, a true horse person. Next week, I'm going to be talking more in depth, because this is just the foundation, and then we get even more in depth on that nurture nature paradigm, that nurture nature balance.